panels notice that both panel house case are merely an example-based case, because they only based all of their argument based on the fact that there are terrorist problems in EU. But let's debunk that idea to begin with, because look, all of these terrorism actions should be differentiated with any hostile action that exists in Europe, for example. Those Paris bombing that they say, those Ariana Grande's concert bombing in UK, for example, were done for a personal reason by those actors and are not correlated whatsoever to any terrorist cells that exist in the status quo. If their assumption is that these terrorist cells are integrated, if I can prove to you otherwise, then their stance can stand. And look, youth problems are more grounded than those terrorist actions. We're talking about economic grievances, for example, due to now economic instability there. We're talking about political stability that's, for example, hampers due to the Brexit, for example. They told you that there are a lot of youth problems that they never cater as government at the house. Then, because their problem was not necessarily only terrorist actions. And look, sustainability of this army are also important. They can't easily get away by saying, look, there are urgency, without even engaging at our point that this might not be necessary in the long run. Because when you talk about a trillion amount of investment, it's important for you to justify this investment. How can this huge investment can be benefited for EU in the long run? It's not enough for them to say, oh, we're going to deal with the short-term problem. Well, then let's just create short-term benefit as well. As Dita told you, for example, like counter-terrorism action that specifically deals with a specific problem. They never justify the sustainability. They cannot get away with this. No, thank you. Let's talk about two things in my speech. First of all, the effectivity to counter the problem in status quo, and second, let's talk about the idea of world stability that never engaged whatsoever. Look, the effectivity to counter problem in status quo. Government only told you, the whole government's analysis was only talking about an urgency level, for example. They told you NATO failed, PACT failed, and collective intelligence failed. But look, just because other alternative fails, that does not necessarily mean that your proposals will be successful. They have to prove to you by a step-by-step analysis why then this specific problem of domestic terrorism can only be solved when a lot of EU countries collectively join a military army and attack and bombard the shit out of that terrorism to begin with. The burden of proof has never been fulfilled at the end of the day. And also look, because we told you comparatively that military union won't solve any problem whatsoever due to two reasons. Look, they also consider the fact that the decision making will be based on the voting because everyone will have the same vote. Look, this is problematic for two reasons. First of all, it takes time. If they consider the fact that problems are, for example, terrorism, then what you need to understand the characteristic of those problems are time sensitivity. That is saying you need to require a fast response for you to solve that problem. But if we go to this other house, that you only over-rely on those military unions that requires other people's agreements, then it takes time, for example, for voting, but by the time you would like to do something, for example, like the problem will not be there anymore, for example. They told you that there's a problem solution mismatch in their problem. If the problem are specifically talking about, for example, like, counter-terrorism, no thank you, then just get a better counter-terrorism proposals in EU, for example, that does not necessarily require you to invest shit tons of money at the end of the day. No thank you. But look, at the second problem, decision making will always then be contingent to other countries' interests. Look, what you need to consider of their benefits are only in a base case scenario that everyone have a collective interest for that specific regards. But not everything happens at that point, for example. For example, take a look at Spain, for example, now, for example, still struggling with Catalonia's independence, for example, like secessions, insurgents, like any hostile political oppositions. No thank you. At this specific and more grounded problem, other countries will have no incentive whatsoever to chip in and help you, for example, because at what cost? For example, they get no benefit whatsoever, but at the cost of a huge amount of money, and their societies, for example, get sent to the warfare, for example, and die at war zone at the end of the day. For example, no thank you. As a country, you have a cost and benefit analysis. Therefore, what they did at the end of the day, this big company will not care as they told you, because the big country can only care for this little country, for example, only in a huge case, for example. But in a daily and a more grounded problem, there will not be any benefit whatsoever for EU. No, thank you. But look, at best in this for the house, even if it might be successful, for example, the military union, it will be at a significant cost. For example, first, they will have to create a new headquarters, new army, and new weaponry that costs a lot of money. Comparatively, in outside the house, when you deal with a specific, for example, like counter-terrorism, you can just use the existing facility at the end of the day. And look, knowing the fact that EU economically is weak now due to the Brexit and Greece bill, for example, they can't easily get away by saying this is not a debate about cost. It is a debate about cost because economic grievances in the ground are important and should be considered in the decision making by EU. They need to justify whether it's okay to dismiss this ground interest of economic grievances just because, for example, this holistic, this abstract narrative of this big company, a big country, to have more power to exert. This is absurd. They can't stand this stance. Yeah.
If you argue a lot of military problems are time sensitive, yet your comparative is on the idea of demilitarization and diplomacy, how do you argue that you're going to be better at that time?
Look, world demilitarizations is not, we still also, for example, still have our own individuals, army, for example, that decision making only happens at the level of the country, for example. The moment that president told you that you do that, then do that. This president should not, for example, find a legitimacy or find validations from other presidents just to solve this existing problem. So that the is not done. Second, more stability. Look, the debate about military union and about international relations as a whole should take a holistic perspective. That is to say, you have to understand and concede to the fact that your actions will impact and have an influence to the whole greater society. Considering that EU as one of the most biggest union in the world, their impact, their action matters because they have significant presence in all around the world. Government cannot get away by saying that they don't care with what happened outside EU. They should care. They have more obligations to care, for example, because now they gave the money to do so. Now look, in this other half, global stability will be hampered due to because they perpetuate instability, for example, because they become more hostile actors and they will also anger Russia. But what do they say about this? Well, Russia will be angry anyway in both other halves. Look, knowing the fact that this Russia will always be angry, you should not legitimize this anger of Putin to begin with. For example, if you strengthen your union, for example, at their side, for example, Putin will have legitimacy and validations of what his action, for example. He will frame his actions as a self-defense, for example, and justify his action to defend their country. This is a legitimacy that we cannot give, and a privilege we cannot give to the Putin. In the counterbalance, in our house, when we demilitarize as a world nations, we have a higher moral ground to say what's good and what's not. That's why, for example, we do not give any legitimacy whatsoever to Putin, and the moment Putin attacks, for example, this is why our sanctions will make sense. Because we told you, we have nothing to do with Putin's invasion whatsoever. Therefore, in our house, sanctions will be beneficial and can stop Putin. Look, you shouldn't give the winning to this team that always get away by the burden of proof. You have to fulfill that, and at the end of the day, we fulfill our burden of proof.